So from solitary confinement to Christmas in the English countryside, quite a change. Tell us about your first night out.
Well, first night out was, of course, a big party here with my people and Vaughan Smith from the Frontline Club. Very nice to be free and in fact, to return home. This is the estate where we did most of the Cablegate production work briefly.
You said immediately last night you're going to speed up the release of these cables. What new revelations can we expect and how much more quickly will they be coming out now?
Well, we're speeding up an internal pipeline, but we're also reaching out to more and more media organizations. That was part of the initial plan, is we'd have the phase one, which would include the big media players and give them a period of exclusivity to show that this really was a very important story. And phase two, to bring in the regional and local and smaller media organizations to spread things out, because there's so much material here that is of really quite important interest to smaller regions. For example, in today's Guardian, we see another Cablegate story. Of course, there has been one every day, and that is reports of abuses in Kashmir. So, with India accused of systemic torture over Kashmir, over 1,296 reports made to the International Red Cross, kept private because that's what the International Red Cross does, but reported to the US ambassador. Nearly just over one half of those cases alleged to involve some form of torture.
I want to read you a comment from Secretary Hillary Clinton, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It puts speaking about the diplomatic cables, puts people's lives in danger, threatens our national security, and undermines our efforts to work with other countries to solve shared problems. What's your response?
Well, this is the usual nonsense that is trotted out for the last 50 years every time the media reveals the abuses of a military or intelligence organization. And in our 4-year publishing history, there has never been a single report of any of our documents causing physical harm to any single person.
But let's talk about some of the information specifically. In the Afghan war logs, for instance, identifying the name of a man trying to defect from the Taliban, identifying another man who had identified those behind an attack and killed 100 civilians.
So let me talk about that. That first case you mentioned, big splash made by Murdoch's The Times, which is, if you like, a competitor to The Guardian, which we worked with here in the UK. Turns out that person, yes, was killed, as they said, 2 years ago by the war. Not someone at risk. Why? Because they were killed by the war in Afghanistan 2 years ago. We see a lot of these attempted smears, twisting the truth. NATO in Kabul, approximately 1 month ago now, told CNN they could not find a single person who was in need of protection in that Afghan material.
But the question is, why release material like that? For instance, in the diplomatic cables as well, sites identified by diplomats as crucial to national security. Why the need to release that particular kind of information?
Well, we can always go to particular examples, and I'm happy to go down to the detail in every single thing we release. So let's do it for the one you mentioned. That cable gave no security information. It gave no precise geographic locations, just very broad sweeps of particular industries and particular countries that the US military and intelligence together believed was of critical importance to sustain its ability to fight wars. It's of vital interest to the countries and the people where those facilities are located. And what was the instruction? The instruction was to US diplomats from Hillary Clinton to go out and find that information and to not speak to the host government about it, to keep it secret. So that's another example of US diplomats being tasked to engage in espionage activities.
But surely you understand that US diplomats, any diplomats, need secrecy to conduct the business of diplomacy, to arrange the release of hostages, for instance. What purpose does it serve to remove that secrecy entirely?
Well, it hasn't been removed entirely whatsoever. This is an isolated incident. Approximately only 1/6 of the cables have been obtained by us and I think we've only released about 2,000 out of 250,000 so far. So it's absolute nonsense that secrecy has entirely been removed, and we must remember the different sorts of jobs people have. Security officers have a job to keep things secret. The press has a job to expose the public to the truth. So that is our job, and we're doing it. The fact that the State Department was not able to do their job is a matter for them.
But you can say in these cables, you see these diplomats doing their job genuinely, attempting to give the best reflection of things on the ground.
Well, and we see a little bit of that coming out. I mean, what we see in these reports is a nuanced perspective, an internal nuanced perspective that reveals the good and the bad, not just about the United States, but about a number of countries. And we are seeing important pushes for reform now occurring all over the world, including in some ways which the State Department wants. There's issues the State Department couldn't get out and it is now freely able to talk about. That is not to say, of course, that the people running the State Department are entirely happy about this, but it is a blessing for many people in different ways, including Hillary Clinton. She only needs to take it in her stride.
I'm fascinated by your motivation. When you started WikiLeaks, you wrote the Manifesto States and Authoritarian Conspiracies. And you compared governments, democratic governments, to conspiracies, to even terrorist organizations. Do you believe that the U.S. government is an authoritarian conspiracy? And do you believe that your work, by opening up leaks, you're intending to weaken the government and possibly a step further bring it down?
Also, you raise a very complex and fascinating description, and it's nice to see that people are finally starting to read some of the underlying philosophy. Unfortunately not all, but some of the underlying philosophy of how I view abusive organizations. So what we see in some institutions, government institutions in the United States, is conspiratorial behavior. Not conspiratorial in terms of the 9/11 conspiracies or something like this, but stated very simply, when individuals in an organization act together in concert, in secret, deliberate secrecy to keep things from the public because they would be opposed by the public, that is a conspiracy.
And you're talking about particular institutions or the whole U.S. government?
No, particular institutions.
Which ones?
Well, State Department. Certainly there are that sort of thing happening in the State Department. We can see it in the release of these cables. And we see instructions from Hillary Clinton coming out of the CIA to steal the DNA of human rights workers, to steal the DNA of Ban Ki-moon. This is a secret, an action done in secret because it would be opposed by the public.
You talk about support you have in America in particular and other democratic countries, support from the public. ABC News conducted a poll, found that 68% of people believe the releases don't serve the public trust but do harm, and 59% of the people, not the government, the public, believe that you should be charged with a crime for these releases.
Well, we'd have to look closely at that. The most credible polling service in the United States is Pew Research, conservative research body. At the time of our Afghan War Diaries release, the most controversial of all the material that we have released. That poll had the majority of people under the age of 50 supporting our release of classified documents about the war in Afghanistan, and the very slight majority of people over the age of 50 not supporting it. That poll also showed the total news volume about the war increased by 300% that week, from 6% to 18%. It also showed that people's opinions about the war moved, and that people's support for the president decreased by some 6%. So that shows real impact and a real division between people, with younger people who understand more about the internet, who understand more about what we're doing, actually supportive in a very interesting way. You know, the US military is a big organization. A lot of people in the United States have family members that have served in the US military, and it's really drummed in to their heads that classification equals patriotism. Of course, these are not true. Classification is just some bureaucrat putting a stamp on something. The underlying meaning of whether something harms or helps national security is something that's intrinsic to the document. It's not something that's intrinsic to what a bureaucrat does. But despite that public association, public fear that classification equals patriotism, we see in that poll that the majority of people under the age of 50 support the release of classified documents by us about the war in Afghanistan.
There's something that I just need clarification on, and you haven't had a chance to, because you've said, speaking specifically, and I have to ask you about this, the allegations in Sweden. You've said many times